very exciting topic. Everybody thinks about taxes, particularly as we get close to April 15th. Okay, we're going to have John. We have two Johns here from the FairTax, from the leaders of the FairTax in New Jersey. They're John Burchell, okay, and John O'Rourke. So they're going to be doing some handouts to you about tonight's presentation and also a card about the FairTax. While they're doing that, the truth. When they were holding up the iPad to do the Pledge of Allegiance, how many of you were thinking of 1984 and George Orwell? I know I was. It's amazing what technology has done. In the beginning, I'd like to start with, talk tonight will be comparing the tax proposals, FairTax, the flat tax, to our current IRS tax code. Okay, great quotes throughout history. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Ronald Reagan. By the way, as we go through, I like it interactive. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Dave,
Yes.
Can you repeat?
We're ready.
Can you repeat the question when folks ask questions? Repeat it so that
Yes.
I can,
Great idea. Thank you. I contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle. Winston Churchill. Really think about what he said. And think about the absurdity. If you are inside a bucket and you're trying to lift yourself up, it is impossible. That's our current tax code. There is no way we can use our current tax code and get back to a balanced budget or financial prosperity. All they keep doing is kicking the can down the road. This is a great one too. Yeah, I know this crowd will love it. A liberal is someone who feels a great debt to his fellow man. A debt he proposes to pay off with your money. G. Gordon Liddy. Here's our true faith. There is only one way to kill capitalism. Taxes, taxes, and more taxes. Karl Marx.
thank you.
Also in Das Kapital, he talked about how do you destroy democracy and capitalism? A so-called progressive income tax, which is precisely what we have today. A progressive, or so-called, I hate using that word progressive, because to me, for a lot of folks, the word progressive means moving ahead forward. We all take it to mean something else, but for a lot of the general public, that is a good word. That's why I don't really like using it when talking to the general public. What do you call it when someone steals someone else's money secretly? Theft. What do you call it when someone takes someone else's money openly by force? Robbery. What do you call it when a politician takes someone else's money in taxes and gives it to someone who is more likely to vote for him? Social justice. Homicide. Is that not true? Yeah. How many politicians, Republican and Democrat, they think that they are helping someone by giving them a handout? All they're doing is enslaving that person and tying that person into a life of poverty. Because at that point, they own that person. And that's just how they like to keep it. That's why it's so important, that's why I love groups like yours, about getting people to understand what freedom and liberty is about. It's freedom and liberty for everyone. Not only the rich, not only the poor, for everyone. And that's how people can succeed in America. You can't do it by keep having people sit home and rewarding them for doing nothing. That just doesn't work. History has shown that throughout time. The power to tax is the power to destroy. John Marshall, Second Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Daniel Webster actually was arguing the case before the Supreme Court, and he used words very similar to this. And Daniel Webster became a famous senator from Massachusetts in the early part of the 1800s. And Chief Justice Marshall reiterated it in his decision, talking about the power of taxation in the tax case. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Are we not finding that true? Mm-hmm. In Washington, what do they want? More and more. They want to tell you what to do. They want to tell you what you can eat. They want to tell you what kind of car you can drive. They want to tell you what kind of health care you will be allowed to have.
What kind of light bulbs?
What light bulbs you can use. Think about that. Where do they get off? Where do you see in the Constitution it telling me what kind of light bulb I can use? I haven't seen it in there.
What's the point?
What's the point of?
saying that they're controlling what kind of household.
What is, because they don't have the right to. Nobody gave them the right to tell me this. Declaration of Independence, if you really look at it, what was that about? Thomas Jefferson was redressing our grievances and why we were declaring ourselves free and independent of England. But what was he truly saying? In simple, everyday street language. King George III, who died and made you God? You don't have the right to tell me what to do. Same thing whether it's Barack Obama, Congress. They are not your boss. We've got to get over that in this nation. Everybody tends to think, well, he's our leader. That means he can tell us what to do. No, no, no. He is under a contract under the U.S. Constitution to run the government. But the government has no right, according to the U.S. Constitution, to try to run our personal affairs. What the Constitution does is limit their right to tell us what to do. And somehow we have allowed them to circumvent that and think they have the divine right to tell us. And I think we have to get back to what Thomas Jefferson was saying. He said, wait, who died and made you God? Where do you get off telling us how to live our lives as long as we are not eroding on other people's freedom? Ah, the U.S. tax code. 65,000 plus pages of loopholes and gimmicks designed to keep politicians in office and the people enslaved to the government. Pop quiz. How many people here seriously think there has been a human being alive who has read the entire tax code? I assume everybody's saying none, right? Okay. And yet we get real upset when we find out they haven't read a 2,000-page healthcare bill. Think about this. 65,000 pages, nobody knows what's in it. And a moment of truth, there's not a human being alive who hasn't used the tax code incorrectly. It's impossible not to. There are so many contradictions in there. And every day it changes. Every day somebody is in tax court. Which means that there is a new part of the law interpreted, added, subtracted, etc. There is no way anybody can accurately do their taxes and be 100% sure, which means that the IRS would have a lot of power over us, because they could claim we did something wrong. How long do you have to keep your tax records for?
7 years.
7 years.
7?
7. Except if you committed fraud. Think about that. I'm the IRS. Let's see here. Deb, I think you committed fraud. You got rid of your tax records from 15 years ago. But I'm challenging you by saying you committed fraud. You've lost. Because what else do we know about tax court? Is it different than all our other tax or other courts?
Yes.
You are guilty until proven innocent. Think about that. You have to prove you didn't do what they're claiming you did. So if you had gotten rid of your records from 15 years ago and they claim you committed fraud, you have a problem. Ever notice when changes are made in the tax code, such as politicians increasing the amount, what happens? Everybody recall when Bill Clinton raised the rate from 35 to 39%, what happened? You're all sitting home, and he gets up and says, we're raising it on the rich or whatever, fine, the high so they can earn it, fine. But we're expanding the child tax credit, this, that, and the other thing. So you then sit there with your spouse and look at each other and say, I don't know, we're better off or not. I don't know. So then they go to the panel of experts right after the president's speech, and they ask them. And they all say, well, it depends. What does it mean? They want you to be confused. If you're confused, you will not complain. You'll sit there and go, gee, I don't know if I'm better off or not, so I'm not going to say a word. That's why we have a 65,000-page tax code. What happened when the New Jersey Parkway went to raise it from 25 cents to 35 cents 20 years ago? We were up in arms, they were actually protest, everything, because we knew that was a tax increase. It wasn't like we were getting every fifth toll free. We knew we were paying more, and that upset people. But if you raise the tax rate, but say I'm expanding this and that, some people will win, some people will lose. Everybody says, I don't know if I'm a winner or a loser, so I'm going to be quiet. That's how they get you. Right. Now, currently there are two main tax proposals to replace the current tax code. The fair tax and the flat tax. So I'm going to go briefly through both to show you what the differences between the two are. By the way, how many of you are familiar with the fair tax? Okay, a few. Well, the idea, our objective, I am the District 12 Director for Fair Tax New Jersey, so in the interest of public disclosure, thank you. I favor the fair tax, but I want you to understand both. But the point, the fair tax, folks, we want it to become a household name in New Jersey. We want it to be where people will sit there and say, my gosh, I understand it, sounds good. I mean, like the flat tax better, your choice. But the point is, it becomes a household word. So some politician cannot make lies about the fair tax and get away with it. Because that's what will happen a lot of times with entrenched politicians. Does everybody know Anna Little?
Yeah.
Okay, when she ran, and she was an advocate of the fair tax, Frank Pallone, her opponent, went in and said, oh, she's looking to raise taxes. It was a total lie. He took his cheap shot, and it goes up because people don't understand the fair tax. Okay, we learned our lesson. Our job is to make it a household name where everybody understands it, so the Frank Pallones of the world cannot get away with that anymore. Comparisons between the fair tax and the flat tax. The fair tax is a national sales tax. It is based on consumption. It's a sales tax. You go to a store, you buy a new product or a new service, you pay the tax then. It will replace your income taxes, including your alternative minimum tax, payroll taxes, which are what? FICA, Social Security, and Medicare. They will be replaced. They will be paid when you pay the fair tax. Corporate taxes. Corporations will no longer pay taxes. Estate taxes. So the wealth stays with the family. It doesn't go to Uncle Sam. By the way, I'm waiting for some reporter to really have the courage to ask this. How much did Ted Kennedy's family pay in estate tax return?
Zero.
We don't know. But here's the thing. Here's a man who spent his whole life saying he was working for the poor and he's tired of rich people getting away with it. You think some reporter would really say, okay, let's see if Ted and the family practice what they preach. I think we all know where it's going to go.
I think when that car went over into the water and everything, the only thing that he owned was that car. He had no money. Everything was in trusts. So he dodged the whole thing for a civil suit. They paid off.
Doesn't matter. No, believe me.
That's your point, isn't it?
Yes, but the Cannon family has things in trust to corporations. My point is, again, elitism, the tax code.
Yeah.
Why does he get that when you folks don't? Why should he get away with it? And especially, he's the one preaching that he cares so much about the poor. Prove it.
Right.
Prove it. Put your money literally where your mouth is. And that's what we have to do. That's when it becomes a winning issue for our side. If they want class warfare, give it to them. Don't back off and let Warren Buffett get away with what he gets away with his propaganda. Challenge him on it, which is starting to happen, which sooner or later will make him and Pelosi and gang start lowering their rhetoric, because suddenly they'll realize people are going to say, Nancy, how come you're not redistributing your wealth? Barack, you're worth $10 million. Start giving it away. Prove to us that you practice what you preach. Back to the, that was a side note, by the way. Sir.
Perhaps the question may be premature, if it is, let me know. The national sales tax, what I don't understand is, in manufacturing environment, where you have multiple levels of
Value-added tax?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not the value-added tax. We'll get to that later. Ask me about that later, and we'll get to that. Okay, the flat tax is a flat income tax rate. It will be based on income, okay? So it still will be an income tax like we currently have, but instead of there being different tiers, and there are different proposals out there. That's why you see as I go along when I talk about the flat tax, I couldn't give you I gave you generalizations because there are 3 or 4 different flat tax plans in Congress right now. Payroll taxes will still be there, so you'll still have your FICA. Your corporate taxes will be there, but the rate should be flat. That's part of most proposals for the flat tax. They will also pay a flat rate. Standard deductions will be in place. Dividends, capital gains, and estate taxes may be exempted. Now well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. The current code, you pay income taxes, payroll taxes, alternative minimum taxes, corporate taxes, estate taxes, excise taxes like gasoline, liquor, etc. Utilities tax. Everybody remember you were paying for the Spanish-American War up until a few years ago? And then they caught that they've been charging you for over 100 years for that? Oops. And they forgot to take it off. Telephone usage tax, embedded taxes, self-employment taxes. That's all part of our 65,000-page albatross. Yes?
How much percentage would the income tax, not the income tax, I'm sorry, the sales tax have to be to support a company?
On the fair tax, that'll be coming up when I get to the specific parts of the fair tax. Question was, what will the tax rate be? We're going to get to that. Sir?
Going back to the previous slide that you have
Yes.
about the taxes that we pay.
Yes.
One tax that we are all paying, and is very high tax, I consider a tax, is the low interest rate that people are being paid on their savings account.
Right,
To
versus
bear our
inflation,
banks.
versus purchasing power. That's an
And that is a
invisible tax.
tremendous tax.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're not gonna get too much into that tonight, but what he's saying is the tax that you get because of your low interest rate, you couple that with inflation, you got a loss of purchasing power, which is a real tax that most people don't see. The fair tax will replace, as we mentioned, personal income taxes, payroll taxes, social security, Medicare, estate and death, business, alternative minimum, excise and embedded, once again. Now, the fair tax, consumption is more reliable and predictable than income as a revenue source. Since 1900, consumption has gone up every year. You may say, well, wait a minute, what about during the Depression? Even during the Depression, it went up. Why?
Because everybody else.
More people, well, you guys are smart, yes. Most people look at me blankly and go, well, how can that be? Exactly, population increase exponentially grows, therefore the consumption was even greater. So if you're basing your tax base on that consumption, what does that mean? It'll be much more stable. What happened when unemployment shot up? Tax revenues go up or down from the income tax?
Down.
Way down. Social security revenues, up or down?
Down.
Down. Because if people aren't working, they're not making income, pay less in tax, therefore less payroll taxes are being paid as well. No special interest or loopholes. Illegal immigrants will be paying the fair tax. They go in a store and buy something, they pay the tax. Criminals, drug dealers. Even drug dealers go to the store to buy their girlfriend a mink coat. Pay the tax, buddy. Tourists come to America, which we want, grow the economy, they will be paying the tax as well. Nobody is exempted. In short, over 300 million people will pay. Now think about that. If 300 million people are paying, spread out instead of less than, what are we saying now? Only 50% roughly are paying tax in this country right now? 47 are not paying, so 53 are saying, but it's roughly 50. Now you'll have everybody, over 300 million people pay. My son goes in a store and buys something, he's paying the tax.
And it's voluntary.
And it's voluntary. You choose when you pay. That's the beauty of it, sir.
Will the tourists get refunded?
No,
No.
absolutely not.
This is not a
It's a sales tax. It's like when, if a tourist goes right now into New Jersey, into a store and buys a candy bar and pays that 7% sales tax, he can't say, I'm a tourist, I get a rebate. Same thing with the fair tax.
We don't have a rebate system in this country. They have it in Europe for the
Yeah, that's
VAT.
what I'm thinking.
And Canada.
This is not a VAT.
They don't
Yeah,
have it. They don't have it.
See,
We don't have
you keep thinking of it as a VAT. It is not a VAT. And the big mistake is people keep equating the VAT and the fair tax. They are two totally different animals. I saw the question made.
What about the 49 million on food stamps?
We're going to get to that.
Dave, explain to them why it's voluntary.
Okay, the reason we're saying it's voluntary is you choose when you buy something. Do you not make a choice to go buy something? If I decided I wanted to buy a new car tomorrow, well, I have a choice. Tomorrow morning I could wake up and say, gee, I'll buy a new car, or no, I won't buy a new car. If I don't buy a new car, that means I am saving money. I'm saving also then the tax. It also then gives me a reason and an incentive to save. And contrary to what Congress believes, people have to save money in this country. For years, what were we told? The problem with America when Japan was rising in the 1980s was, what was the problem?
We didn't save enough.
We didn't save enough. Americans have a negative savings rate. And they're valid. That's a valid point. We didn't. Then, unfortunately, George Bush, the economy's going south. What does George Bush say?
Go shopping.
Go shopping. I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe, and he's a Republican. Go figure. Go shopping. We're not saving in this country. People don't understand how important it is for there to be savings, a rainy day fund. It's the most simple way I can explain it to folks. Say your child wants to buy a house. They need money for down payment, but they don't have enough. Who do they normally go to? Mom and dad. Now how can mom and dad help them? Because mom and dad had saved money. So now mom and dad can help them get their start. Think about that and multiply that through the economy. Not talking about Timmy and Ben printing funny money down in Washington. I'm talking about real solid savings. Yes?
I have a question on the previous
Slide?
slide. It said used goods would not be taxed under this.
Because
In other
the
words, like
idea is,
used cars, what about houses?
no tax.
Because I just heard that they're gonna put a new tax on, more, like if you get a mortgage and
Yeah,
that.
well, that's a proposal before Congress, transaction tax for all banking transactions. Got to understand, we're 14 trillion in a hole. They don't want you to realize they've been embezzling money for years, spending it foolishly. So they're sitting there thinking, how can we come up and save money? Is this any different than what Bank of America tried a month and a half ago when they were putting all these fees on everything? They've got to cover the fact that they have been losing money for years, and they've got a toxic number of bad mortgages that still have to come on the market. But they don't want everybody to realize all is not well. So what do? They come up with a teller fee and this fee, and then what did all you folks do? Yeah, you do that? I'm out of here. Oh, they ended it. Congress
So
is taking
So they won't actually, if you want to buy a used car,
No
you won't
tax.
pay tax.
no tax. Because the idea is that money has already been, the embedded have already been paid on that item. Now, believe it or not, home builders are actually, new home builders are actually some of the biggest proponents of the fair tax. Because when you see why, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but when embedded taxes come out and all, that new house will still be competitive. And if people are getting under the fair tax, what do you notice? It replaces all those taxes. What does that mean? You can be getting your whole paycheck. So if you make $1,000 a week, take out your state taxes, and let's say you made $1,070 in state taxes, your check will be for $930. If you have $930 in your pocket, we all know the basics of economics. More money in your pocket means what? You spend more. Human nature, it's the American way. Linda, did you have-
I was going to explain that that's the #1 reason why the fair tax is a choice. Because if you want to buy a car and buy a new car, you pay the tax. But if you decide that you want to buy a car and buy a used car, then you don't pay the tax. If you want to go to Barnes & Noble and buy a new book, you pay the tax. But if you want to shop at a flea market or go on Amazon and buy a used book, then there's no tax. So it gives you the choice. You're in control over what you decide to do.
You will decide. Yes.
There's also an added to that, is you also get a choice of what type of car you want to buy. So if you are rich and you want to buy a Mercedes, you're going to pay the tax on the Mercedes. Whereas if you are so-called middle class or under and you buy a lower car, you're only going to pay the tax on that car.
So you
again,
get to choose your
control it.
taxes.
And that goes with
okay.
clothing and everything.
Makes the funding of Social Security and Medicare more stable and predictable. Why is that? Right now, is there not a threshold on those? Approximately 105,000. Over 105,000 in wages, you do not pay FICA taxes, correct? But under the fair tax, every time you go in a store, my son goes in a store, buys that candy bar, a percentage of that tax he's paying will go to fund Social Security and Medicare. So there is no threshold. Every transaction, part of that money goes to Social Security and Medicare. Social Security and Medicare, as you all know, I know I'm preaching to the choir, are basically bankrupt at this point. They claim to have a $2.8 trillion positive balance in Social Security. Okay, government speak, true confession. What do they mean by the words positive balance?
It means the treasury would know.
Treasury wrote to know it's an IOU. They don't want to keep calling it an IOU because Al Gore told us, we've put a lockbox in, and we are not going to touch it. And of course, they went into the lockbox and took it. So it's the same as you going to a restaurant tonight, buying dinner. A week later, you hear a knock on your door. It's the restaurant owner explaining, well, you know, the money you gave me last week for the dinner, I don't have it anymore. Could you pay me for the dinner again? You would not be happy. You would not probably go back to that restaurant. Congress is petrified. You're going to realize they took the $2.8 trillion, have no way to pay it back, proven every year because we have a deficit. Where are they going to get the money? They're trying to do it without you realizing. That's one reason they love to talk about the VAT, the value-added tax. It's a hidden tax. They could add it, you'll blame the evil restaurant owner or the store owner. Meanwhile, they're not making any more money. It's the government getting the money. That's why governments love a VAT tax. That's why we can't let them get away with it. The fair tax promotes growth by ending the waste of hundreds of billions of dollars in tax preparation and compliance costs. It reduces the hours spent on these non-productive activities. Tax prep, compliance, and avoidance do not add any value to the aggregate American economy. The current system just shifts the money from one American to the next. You pay your accountant $1,000 this year to do your tax return. Has that increased the value of America one iota?
No.
No, just 1,000 from one American to 1,000 to another. We haven't grown anything, we haven't produced anything. It's a total waste. It's over $350 billion a year we spent on compliance costs, man hours, etc. Imagine if we put that time to productive use. Actually started thinking about building new industries, new economies in America to go compete with the rest of the world. That's what we should be focusing on. Not sitting there having to fill out a whole stack of forms, which for the environmentalists, you want to get the environmentalists on our side, point out all the trees that are being cut down for that. And little by little, we can win the way. Yes?
Yes. How do you know that taxes from when you borrow goes where it should go?
Okay, because it's the same as when they pay New Jersey sales tax right now. It will be the same kind of setup. Now, could the store turn around and not pay the tax yet? But it's a lot easier for the IRS to catch them. Instead of chasing 120 million individual tax returns every year, claiming who to audit, there'd probably be, John, do you know how many businesses do we say there are?
20 million.
20 million. There would be about 20 million things
Would
they have to
reduce from
follow.
155 million taxpayers to 20 million.
20 million. Think about it. It'd be much more easier and efficient. Now, we're not claiming under the fair tax it'll do away with the black market. It won't. You will always have a black market. But still, as I said, the black market drug dealers still go to the store and buy things. They don't rent to somebody and buy their groceries hidden somewhere. They actually go to a store and do it.
Just one thing about personal audits. Power to tax is power to destroy. Government starts harassing somebody. I think I've heard, what is it, Sean Hannity or some radio talk show host have complained that they're audited every year or
Sure.
something?
Well, yeah, don't they use that to intimidate you, the threat of an audit? Okay, now, they lose their power. They don't have the power, there's nothing to audit. I went to a store, I bought something. If they're going to audit anybody, it will be the store owner. Walmart is not going to try to shave a couple things off and do that. It's not worth it for them. That would be insane.
Are retailers and businesses in general supportive of the fair tax?
Are retailers in general supportive? Actually, the Retailers Association claims no. They're not. Beyond me, why?
Well, because it fosters more of an interest, a self-interest in purchasing used.
Yes,
or
except,
lesser value.
okay, how many of you folks buy a new car now? How many of you bought a new car in the last 5 years? Raise your hands. Okay. Now, you could have, or leased, same thing, leased a car or new car, how many? Come on, true confessions. Okay, anyhow, the point is, people have the choice. A lot of people will buy new, a lot of people will buy used. But eventually, a car will wear out, and sooner or later, you're going to have to replace it with new cars. In the aggregate economy as a whole. Sooner or later, things will be bought. And the truth of the matter is, we love to claim we buy everything based on price. Is that true? How many of you ever drove a Yugo? Raise your hands. Enough said. We just don't do that. Sir?
Yeah, maybe this is too detailed, but I'm confused. In the case of a lease car, that's what I was going to ask you earlier. You said the sales tax will be applicable to the lease car, but how would that be handled mechanically from the perspective that when you lease a car, you might lease it for a couple of years?
You know how you make a monthly payment?
Yeah. No, but then once you return it, it becomes a used car.
And then when the car company then turns around and sells that used car at a lot or something, there is no tax.
Yeah, but then isn't that a way of, nobody will buy a car then, because if... No, because if I lease a car for 2 years,
yes,
right, and then I can, I paid my sales tax for those 2 years.
Right.
Then, after 2 years, I purchase the car from the dealer.
Right.
As a used car, I don't pay sales tax. I only pay sales tax. I pay only tax.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You only paid it on the residual amount of the lease. No, at that point, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure they've covered that. Sir?
You can give me a ballpark number as far as what we would say that by removing the IRS as far as billions of dollars, and just a rough ballpark estimate.
$350 billion in compliance costs throughout the country. And it costs us about $20 billion to run the IRS right now. Obviously, the IRS would shrink, thank God. And on top of that, people say, I've actually had people ask us, well, what about all those people who lose their jobs? We have literally lost millions of jobs in this country, manufacturing businesses overseas because of our stupid tax code. Now we're worrying about, what about the IRS or accountants who will lose their jobs? Here's the good news.
Lawyers.
We do have, what are IRS agents good at? Investigating. I say we send them to the border and start getting control of our borders. You're good at investigating, investigate away. Secondly, an accountant, a true accountant realizes, oh my gosh, if this ever goes in, my companies I work for are going to expand. You still need an accountant. He just will not be wasting his time filling out a silly form. H&R Block, yeah, they're not going to be that happy with us. But you can't run a country worried about what H&R Block thinks. Sir.
You said that retailers aren't very happy with the fair tax. How do they feel about flat tax?
Don't know. I honestly don't know what the National Retail Association says about that. John?
I think I'm answering this question, okay? From there's been a study done by the Americans for Fair Taxation, that if the fair tax had been in place in 2009 and in 2010, in 2009, it would have brought in $171 billion more than the present tax code. And in 2010, it would have brought in $267 billion more than the present tax code.
Taxes based on consumption. 300 million people paying, you actually bring in more money.
How do you limit the spending?
That has nothing, the fair tax is designed to be revenue neutral.
I mean, say they establish 15% as a flat tax, just for arbitrarily.
Fine, right.
How do you prevent that number from going up when Congress goes, okay, this is not working, we need
Vote
more?
them out of office. The fair tax, the flat tax, no tax system is designed. I always hear Reaganomics fail. No, it didn't. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. The idea behind the tax portion of lowering the tax rate was to bring in more revenue. Revenues doubled under Reagan. What we did, though, was for every dollar we brought in, we spent $1.25. The other component to Reaganomics was Graham-Rudman, which was every year they were supposed to reduce the debt by 10%. Every year Congress got around it the same way they did now. Next year we'll make the hard decisions. Oh, next year's an election year. Oh, we'll move it to the following year, because then we'll be on solid ground. We've been hearing this nonsense for 30 years. It's time to say enough. Yes?
Do you have any estimates on the cost for replacing the cost savings for the CPA firms on corporations, as far as Sarbanes-Oxley, or the state, the Fed, et cetera? How would it affect the reduction of that as far as the cost approximate?
I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, you have no personal audits as far as you get the IRS, $260 billion. Okay, right, that's one savings. But now, what about the corporate world? That's individual. The corporate world.
There are no corporate taxes, so $350 billion compliance.
That includes corporates.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, no individual tax returns to file, so the compliance cost will go from $350 billion to zero. Pop quiz. Back to this. Do corporations pay taxes?
No.
The answer? No. Who pays taxes? You do. Don't they add that to the final cost of the product? Aren't all those embedded taxes, etc., added, and then when they figure out when they sell you the loaf of bread, that has been all factored in? Does Exxon really make $3.35 when they sell you a gallon of gas? No. If they're lucky, if they make around 10 cents per gallon. Incidentally, who makes more money per gallon? Exxon or the government? The government. That's why when Hillary starts calling them greedy, I pray one day one of them will be aggressive. Like her. Get more aggressive when they answer back to Hillary and say, tell you what, when you stop getting 24 cents a gallon, then we'll start talking about greed. I only get 10 cents, you get 24, you have no risk, you just take. Remember what Thomas Sowell said? And you want to talk to me about greed? Let's go. You want to talk greed? Let's go. We'll see how quick they back off of that.
Dave, there's a lot of 10th Amendment people here, states' rights people.
Right.
So I just wanted to explain to them that for those of you that believe that we can only strangle the federal government through the states, this is the way to do it, because when sales tax is collected, it's collected to the retailer, and the retailer pays their tax to the state. Under the fair tax system, once the state collects their revenue, they're the one with the check, and they would be holding the money from the federal government. Right now, when they take the money out of your paycheck, it goes straight into the federal government. So states have no ability to withhold funding from the federal government. So this is another reason why Washington doesn't want the fair tax, because then all the states will have the ability to withhold their payment and say, wait a minute, no, we're not going to fund you.
Remember what we said about losing control? They don't want to lose control.
So that is why you said that the flat tax is being considered in Congress a couple of
Of course, because
That's
it'll
one of the
fund
reasons they
them.
like it, because the money will still go to them. Yes. Now, 11 trillion reasons for the fair tax. Thanks to the US tax code, which is a 35% tax rate, which is the second highest corporate tax rate in the world besides Japan for all highly industrialized nations, over $11 trillion are kept offshore by US-based companies. Under the fair tax, they would have no reason to keep so much money there. Alan Greenspan, when he was Fed chairman, was questioned about this, and in his testimony, he was asked, what do you think would happen with that money? He said 90% of it would come back to America. They said, how long would it take? How many years? He said, we're not talking years, we're talking months. Think about it. If you're a US CEO, you have $2 billion sitting offshore, why would you keep it off there? We still are the safest nation to hold an asset in. Why would I keep it offshore if I don't have to pay a tax? By the way, some famous people who also keep their money off tax, you may be interested in knowing, a gentleman by the name of George Soros. Quantum Fund is down in the Cayman Islands. Does the name Bill Clinton ring a bell?
Yeah.
Bill Clinton and Ron Burkle, they were headquartered down in the Bahamas. You think a Republican would have the brains when Hillary said that and started talking about money leaving our country and companies setting up offshore? Somebody would have said, well, what about your husband? But no, that's where the Republicans, that's a whole nother issue, but that's where Republicans lose it. They don't know how to campaign, they don't know how to do PR. It's embarrassing to watch, quite frankly. Right. By the way, General Motors, you folks, thank you very much, by the way, for bailing out General Motors.
And Chrysler.
Now, here's the funny part. General Motors has been profitable every year. See, they were profitable internationally. But they were not going to bring the money back to the U.S. because of the 35% tax hit. So therefore, the money was kept offshore, and you folks got the privilege of bailing them out. Do you know GM makes more fuel-efficient models than any other car company in the world? They just don't make them here because they can't make them here and make a profit. And their union contracts do not allow them to bring the vehicles back in here. What? Yes. That's a little thing that Congress fails to tell you, or Obama, when they pressure for the money. Halliburton left the United States. Why? Their CEO said it flat out. Why should we pay the tax here? Most of our business is going on in the Middle East. So they became under the tax haven of Dubai. We lost all their revenue. GE brags that they don't, even though they're supposedly a good neighbor, you know, code name for helping Obama. Meanwhile, they aren't paying tax.
Good deal.
Sir.
It's also the first time in history that the bankruptcy law has been thrown out, and Barack decided he has a new set of rules.
Right,
so he took my General Motors stock,
That's right.
sold it, gave the government warrant.
You got nothing. You got
stole
zero
my
now.
money, and then the unions gave him $40 million.
Right. Right. But let's take that to what's going on right now, today. What's going on in Greece? Surprise, surprise, they're going to come to an agreement. Who would have thought? Why are they coming to an agreement? IMF is a bank. They're looking to make big fees. What do governments do? U.S. and every government, they never pay off their debt, they roll it over. So when you're rolling it over, you bring the banker in. It's like when you get that new credit card, or you know when you get a mortgage and within a year you start getting questions, why don't you refinance? Why do they want you to refinance? More fees. They're going to hit you up for those fees again. So you're going to pay it again. Greece, the creditors are going to take a 50% haircut. Their rates are going to drop to 4%. And they're willing to do it because otherwise Greece is going to say, we're not paying it back and we're not going to go to work. We're going to sit in the cafe and drink whatever they drink all day. You know, so they're there, and everybody will start realizing the financial wizards who are running the world are basically a bunch of inept economic fools. But they can't let you know that because then you're going to be looking for the nearest sour apple tree. So they can't have that. Albert Einstein once commented that the most difficult thing for him to understand was the U.S. tax code. Now, obviously, Einstein was a very brilliant man. What did he mean?
Too complicated.
No. Well, that's what I always started first, and then it hit me one day what he was trying to say. What he meant was, why would you tax production? If you want more of something, you reward. If you want to punish, you tax. So if you want people to be more productive, why would the more productive you are, tell them the more you're going to have to pay? Tax them on the other end. And he was absolutely right.
There's another advantage to that money coming back from offshore because
with the corporations having more money, they can expand. If they expand, they hire more people. If they hire more people with money, they can buy more goods and pay taxes on it. So it's a good cycle, which is why we may never be able to get the donkey through.
Great point, because think about it. You all have a factory. You're thinking about moving to China, Indonesia, wherever. But suddenly you're told if you put it back here in good old USA, you won't have to worry about all that corporate taxes, any of that. Where are you going to open up? Here. You have no desire to open in Indonesia. You're only going to do it because, and by the way, most companies in this country do not leave because of our so-called high labor rates. China's labor rate is increasing. Japan's, even when their cars were kicking our butt, their rate actually was as high as ours. They were because of the rules, regulations, and tax code of this country. That's why they were looking to move plants out of here.
And the unions.
Embedded taxes. Harvard University study showed that embedded taxes average out to 22%. Embedded taxes are those hidden taxes in all the goods and services we buy. They include the payroll taxes, business taxes, energy taxes that are paid by every entity involved in producing a good or service. You buy a loaf of bread. Anybody ever read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations? He uses a pin, and he explains there were 200 different components made in making a simple pin back in 1776. Now, a loaf of bread. Somebody has to buy seed. Seed company has employees. They have to pay payroll taxes, insurance. All these taxes are included. The farmer buys it. He has to be transported to the farmer. You pay for the delivery, the driver. There's taxes there for that company. You then have, once you grow it, to send it to market, to a jobber, whoever, they pay tax. You then have the baker who actually bakes the bread. Every component in here, if you see, it's almost like a VAT, is paying taxes somewhere along the line. Harvard studies showed that if you averaged it out, it comes to 22%. So if you buy a coat for $100, $22 of that coat is embedded taxes. Remember what we said about corporations not paying any taxes? What will happen? It'll eliminate embedded taxes. Now, thanks to free enterprises, once those embedded taxes are removed, prices will decline. Will they remove the whole 22%? No, because that also includes payroll to the FICA. Now think about it. If your company doesn't your company also pay part of the FICA for you? You pay your contribution and your employer pays the other part, correct? So you may say, wait a minute, that's really part of my salary. So if he doesn't have to pay it anymore, I should be getting a raise to that amount, and you'd have a valid argument. So you could actually get a pay raise out of the FairTax. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, if you need proof that embedded tax, because a lot of people, I know what you're thinking, how do we know those corporations will lower what they charge them? Those are the first to do it. If it's called competition, it's going to happen. I use Jackie Robinson. We all know who Jackie Robinson was, right? A few months ago, John and I did something down at Rider University, and we spoke to kids about the FairTax. This showed me how old I'm getting. We got to the part, and I talked to them about Jackie Robinson, and they all looked at us blankly. I said, do you know who Jackie Robinson is? These are college students. It was scary. It really, I said, oh my gosh. They didn't know who Jackie Robinson was. But anyhow, think about Jackie Robinson. What was he? The first black ball player since the 1880s to be allowed to play in the major leagues. Now, Branch Rickey decided he was going to start looking for black ball players to come up to the big leagues. What did that do? That gave every other owner of a baseball team something he had to think about. Who knows if they were racist? Nobody knows what unwritten code about not allowing black ball players in, but they now all had to think about something. If they were not going to start looking at black ball players for their club, they were going to let the Brooklyn Dodgers get all the black ball players. And if they got the best black ball players along with some of the great white ball players they had, the Brooklyn Dodgers were going to win the World Series every year, and everybody else was going into oblivion. So they had a decision to make based on competition, and simply was they all started going and finding the great black ball players, Willie Mays, Monty Irvin, etc. They all started coming into the major leagues and revolutionized the game. That was great, that was good. The fourth step was competition. Those owners had no choice but to move ahead or be devoured. Same thing here. Two companies. He has a company, I have a company. I say, I'm going to try to keep all that money for myself. You're thinking, I'm gonna get more market share. What do we all know Walmart taught about market share? Lower profit margin, bigger market share, bigger gross profits. Isn't that what Reaganomics was? Lower the tax rate, people stop trying to hide money and they just start paying. They end up with more revenue. It works, that is basic economics.
Can you clarify, just forgive me if I'm a little slow on this. I always thought that the fair tax excluded the social security.
No, Social Security would be paid within the fair tax. It is not excluded, it's part of it. It's a portion of that fair tax you'll be paying is included.
It funds social
It funds
security.
Social Security and Medicare.
Okay, so then the employee will no longer match?
Right, correct.
No.
Yes, employer will no longer match.
That's what I
Yes.
wasn't sure, okay.
Okay, now, back to the rate, John.
This question of competition is important. And we have a case in 1996. On January the 1st, that says 6% sales tax per seat on the airline seats. The Congress forgot, believe it or not, to renew the tax. So on January the 1st, the tax disappeared, but the ticket stayed at the price. And then a couple of weeks later, some airline did exactly what Dave said. They said, well, I'm going to get more backsides on my seats, I'll reduce the price. Within 3 months, all the prices had come down by the 6%, and on April the 1st, the Congress reenacted.
They got their memory back.
They reenacted the tax, and the tickets
Now
went
you're
back up.
all thinking.
But it works, it works.
You're all thinking, well, what is the tax rate, right? Come on. Okay, the rate would be 23% inclusive and up to 30% exclusive. The reason why that's different is in how you calculate the tax, which I'm going to show in the next slide. I'm pointing this out because a lot of critics of the fair tax charge, they're lying, it's not 23%, it's 30%. It's a matter of semantics, as you'll see right now.
Can I talk to you about that?
Well, let me go to the next one because I have it on there. Okay, 23 or 30%. You purchase a coat for $100. The fair tax is included. When you get your receipt, it's going to be included. So you paid, of that, you all paid a tax of $23, which will clearly show up as it does your New Jersey sales tax right now on receipt. It'll clearly show the fair tax, $23. 23 divided by 100 equals 23%. Now, if we do the math differently and we say $23 though divided by that $77, which is left, right, 100 minus 23 equals 30%. But in either case, you are paying $23. So do you really care if they call it 23% or 30? See, that's a Frank Pallone move. The bottom line was you were paying the same dollar amount. In reality, isn't that all you cared about, knowing is how much actual dollars you're paying?
The question is discount versus markup.
Right.
A lot of people here may not know what discount and markup is. But for some reason, the fair tax doesn't use those simple words. So if you're talking about a discount from 100 or the markup from 77.
Right. Sir?
I understand about Social Security and Medicare.
Yes.
Where does Medicaid fit in all?
That's funded too. Everything is funded in that fair tax. We always talk about the Social Security and Medicare, but that also includes Medicaid.
Okay, so we're talking 23%.
Yes.
Realistically, when you add up all the taxes we pay,
Right.
embedded or otherwise, where are we, percentage-wise?
What do you mean?
Oh, right now, currently.
Currently.
The average American currently right now is in the 45 to 50% tax bracket. Yes, good Lord is right. Well, yeah, I want to keep moving on this. I don't want to. Okay. With that, if you want later on, we're done, but I want to make sure we have the time on that. But basically, right now, the average American, when the tax union, tax foundation does it, they're saying you're paying between 40 and 45% the average American, which includes all those embedded tax. People say, how can that be? You include your state sales tax, etc., everything. You're up around 45%. Now, I have a story. I didn't bring it in here, but I got it off 2 days ago from the New York Times. This gentleman, he's a big investment person. He's a multimillionaire. Last year, his taxes were 102% of his income. They said, this can't be. They were showing it, looked through it, his accountant said it is. His accountant advised him to do what? Fire everybody, move to Florida, get out of the business. And he was taking, the write-offs and all. He's similar almost to a Warren Buffett, but the way his personal tax, which makes you think how crazy. Romney's paying 15%, Buffett's paying 15%, this guy's paying 102%. It's all how that income is classified. True confession here. As Deb said, my business is real estate investing. We buy houses, rehab them, rent them, sell them, etc. I've been doing it for 30 years. I don't pay that much in taxes right now. I pay a lot in property taxes, but not in income, etc. Under the fair tax, I personally will pay more in tax. But it's not about me, it's about what's right for the country, bottom line. Okay, under the current code, let's assume a taxpayer earns $1,000 a week gross and nets $750 after taxes, which are federal $200 and state $50. What is the federal rate? Is it 20%, which is the 200 divided by 1,000, or if we're going to use what the critics say, 25%, which is 200 divided by 800? See, we can turn that back around on it. If they ever charge you with the fact, oh, it's really a higher rate, so okay, well, what is the current rate? They'll say, well, it's 20. Oh, really? Do the math and you come up with this. Two can play that game is what I'm trying to say. Fairness, the prebate. A question was asked before about groceries, and I think folks on food stamps. To ensure that everyone is treated equally, the fair tax has a feature called the prebate. The prebate reimburses the fair tax for the necessities of life. For instance, your groceries, bills, etc. are covered. Each month, families will receive a prebate. A family could be a single person living in an apartment. It could be somebody who has 10 children. Anything that is that household, the head of that household, every month will receive either through a debit card or a check, the prebate, which the following chart will show it how it will work. Okay. For instance, let's say we have a one adult household with 2 children. I'm sorry you can't see that. That would be the third line down. That would be $18,530 annual consumption. Again, that's not supposedly all they make. That is to cover their necessities. That's the schedule put out by the federal government every year, Human Services, for the poverty level within the United States. You have to spend $18,530 on your basic necessities, which comes to an annual prebate. 23% of $18,530 is $4,262. Divide that by 12. Every month they'll receive a check for $355, which is to cover the tax they will pay. Because remember before we said there's no exceptions? I go to a grocery store, I buy food, I pay a tax. But I'm being rebated that money every month by the prebate. So if I'm a good shopper and I am very frugal and smart, I'm rewarded for being frugal, smart, and saving money, which is what we need in this country, more people saving money. Okay. Judy is a single mother with 2 children at home. She works and earns $1,000 a week. Under the current code, if she makes $1,000, her income tax would be $150, her payroll tax would be $76.50, New Jersey tax $70, so she will net $703.50. Under the fair tax, $1,000, take away your New Jersey tax, she'll get $930. Okay? As the prebate chart shows, a one adult household with 2 children, she has her annual of $4,262, as I mentioned. Every month she'll get $355 to cover the necessities. So in effect, she will receive an additional $82 a week. Is that not true? 82 times 4 basically comes to $355. So perhaps best of all, Judy, through her planning, desires, and needs, will decide how much tax she's going to pay. Well, remember what we said before? As Linda said, you get to decide. You are rewarding yourself. You have that self-incentive. Isn't the greatest self-motivating you yourself? Not listening to some inspiring speech from Washington from some blowhard politician. Not the president, not the Congress, lobbyists, bureaucrats, or experts decide. Judy will decide. In short, Judy will be free to choose. Ma'am.
Did I read, is she getting more than her salary with this prebate?
In theory, yeah. I never thought of it that way, but absolutely right. Because if you take the 30, so in effect she'll be getting $1,005 a month or so, a week, I'm sorry, yeah.
And everybody gets this prebate?
Everybody. Warren Buffett gets it. If he wants to donate it, God bless you, Warren. But everybody will get it. And the reason for this is so nobody can claim that you're discriminating against the poor. People say, well, why don't you cut it off for the rich? Once you start that, you're starting the special interest routine, which Congress, lobbyists, and everybody love. We've got to get away from that. Personally, I don't understand why everybody's worried about how much money Warren Buffett makes, this one, that one. If people one thing when I ran for Congress I wanted, first I want to get rid of the Department of Education. I said, I will pass one rule. Children have to be taught economics starting in middle school. If they got 5 solid years of economics, true economics, not the Paul Krugman nonsense, with people like Thomas Sowell, Henry Hazlitt, von Mises, etc., you would get rid of liberals in 10 years. Because children will realize that they're being screwed by it. That's the bottom line. That was the one thing I would love to see, yes.
Won't this make for an awful lot more paperwork again, though?
Oh, absolutely less.
No, but I mean, this will create more paperwork again.
No, not at all. It's very simple. The New Jersey, for instance, the New Jersey sales tax, there's only one form, an ST50, that how many of you have to pay the New Jersey sales tax in your businesses? Every month, right? You do it, and you've got it down to a science. You find out what the amount is, do it. It's one form. That's it. What do you think? What do you do right now for your corporate tax return, Dad? Mountains, right? Mountains.
But what I'm talking about is, I mean, general paperwork, because the state's gonna have to collect this.
That's how we do it
And
now.
then they're
There's
gonna get
one form
prebates.
each
The
month.
prebates are gonna be more work.
That's why I mentioned, good question, that's why I mentioned the debit card. Right now, they're pretty good at sending out checks. They send out their Social Security checks like clockwork, so they do have that down. Again, and we're going to a paperless society in that regard. How many people get Social Security now get it direct deposit? How many, I have tenants who pay me direct deposit, now things like that. It's much more efficient, and that's the way of the world. So actually, you're going to be reducing paperwork.
Dave,
Yes.
the question of the paperwork, from the individual point of view, the individual household, once a year they have to put in a postcard to show the legal Social Security numbers in the household. People who are not legal don't get the prebate.
Great point.
Then all you have to do is send in a postcard.
If you're an
Once a
illegal,
year.
if you're an illegal alien, what John is saying, you don't get the prebate. You have to be
They'll
here
lobby
legally.
for it.
But if they go to the store and buy something, they're still paying the tax.
They'll be lobbying for it.
2 points.
Yes.
If I understand it correctly, the prebate is equivalent to the tax, pretty much.
On the necessities.
On the necessity, but if you talk about low-income person that is spending
Yeah,
18,000
Could
in
very well be.
necessity, they make 18,000, so they,
No, remember, they had 2 children. If it was a single person making minimum, then they'd get about 150 a month.
but my point being, if the person makes, the prebate amount is equivalent close to the prebate, then that person, or there's going to be a segment of our society which could be significant, that still will not pay any taxes. I'm of the belief that everybody should pay a little bit of tax.
If they want to live at that level, yes, nothing you can do about that. If you're trying to make it where everybody's going to pay, and they want to stay at, and only make $18,000 a year, there's no way. You're not going to. It's just not
Okay,
going to. Okay, what's the other point?
The other point was, in Social Security, this is one thing that's not clear with me again. If the individual doesn't pay Social Security directly,
Right.
and pays it through the tax.
Right.
Understand that. But then, how do you measure, or will everybody get the same Social Security?
Okay, that's a little complex for what I want to do tonight, but yeah, there is a formula.
Okay.
Social Security has a formula for that. I want to keep moving because I got to get to the flat
Okay, I'm
tax.
sorry.
Because remember, this is also the flat tax. Okay, so now Judy wanted to buy that cone. So which deal is better for Judy? The current code to get $703.50 in her weekly paycheck, run out and buy that coat, we're keeping off state sales taxes, etc. for this. Okay, so she'll have $603.50 after she paid $100 for the coat, she'll have to file a tax return that year, and she'll have the possibility of an audit. Whereas under the fair tax, she would have gotten her $930, paid $100 in tax, so she'll still have in her pocket $830, no tax return, no audit. Which one would you prefer? I know which one I would prefer. Okay, so the choice is yours. If you want more information, it's on those papers as well, but www.fairtax.org. Now, the flat tax. As I mentioned, there are different proposals out there for the flat tax, so I have to talk about it in generality. The flat rate proposals right now are between 17% and 28%. Standard exemptions apply. Payroll taxes still apply. Corporate taxes will be flat, as I mentioned before. Excise taxes will still be in place. Deductions will be limited. Under most of the plans we're talking about, it will be the home mortgage deduction, charitable contributions, and education. Okay, standard exemptions will call, and the most flat tax proposals call for generally in the $8,000 to $10,000 per person range. Flat tax versus fair tax and a wage tax comparison chart. Okay, they both, I don't know what happened there, but either way, each one of them, the gross wages are $75,000. We'll use the left line first. Standard deduction will be 0. Adjusted gross, wait, that guy's, I don't know how, that guy's, oh, the line, you missed the line. Okay, the standard deduction under most flat tax plans, this is on a family of 4, I factored this, would be $32,000. I'm sorry, something, lines got mixed up there. But anyhow, that $32,000 should be under the standard deduction under the flat tax. Okay, gosh, everything got screwed up there. Let me see if I can see it on here so I could explain it, yeah. I'll do it off of here, I apologize for that. As a matter of fact, I do think it's also in your paper. Okay, so if you could follow along there. Okay. Payroll taxes, so by the time you're done, what is your net on that? Do we have an extra one of those? Because mine screwed up on this computer too. Okay. So we start with the $75,000, your standard deduction under the flat tax. By the way, a lot of this is predicated, Steve Forbes, a local neighbor here, is a big champion of the flat tax. By the way, a lot of our folks in FairTax here, we actually started out as proponents of the flat tax. But once we learned about the fair tax and compared the two, when I first started, I said, no way, flat tax has got to be better. But this is years ago now, but as I learned more and more about it, I started doing the calculation. Because I understand finance and economics, I said, you know what? Fair tax actually works better. But suffice it to say, either one of these would be light years better than what we have right now.
Yes.
Okay, so we take off our standard deduction under the flat tax, I'm sorry, of $32,000. We adjust our gross, which is $43,000. I averaged out that their mortgage interest for the average family in America would be $8,400. That constantly changes every year according to the depreciation, etc. Payroll tax of $2,430. State tax of $5,250. So your net would be $26,920. If you look at the tax chart, because it goes up in rates, but I figured that at a flat rate of 17%. So I actually did it on the lowest level for comparison. So then your income tax would be $4,575. So your adjusted would be $22,345. You add back in the money from your standard exemption, which was at $32,000, and you would come up with $53,345. Everyone see that? Under the fair tax, you have your $75,000. You're going to be taking off your state taxes. Remember, you said you're still responsible for state taxes of $5,250, so you get $69,750. So under the flat tax, bottom line, in your pocket, end of the day, you would have $54,345. In the fair tax, you would have $69,750. So once again, you'd have more money actually in your pocket with the fair tax.
How about the third comparison against the current income tax?
Under the current, I didn't do that one, but to suffice it to say, under the current level, because again, 65,000 pages, each one of you would have a different number. But to suffice it to say, you would probably be coming in with, depending on write-offs, etc., you'd probably be coming in very comparable to what is under the flat tax. The main thing about the flat tax would be, you could be getting rid of a lot of the idea of special interest. But my fear again is every year Congress would creep in and say, oh, we have to save this one, we have to do this, we have to do that. I mentioned I'm a real estate guy. Depreciation, it's the biggest con game going. Let's face it. Why am I getting to depreciate that? Why? Do you realize under our current code, you could write off gambling? But if my business, I was a sole proprietor, I wouldn't be able to write off my health care? Does this make sense? That these well-meaning congressmen came up with? I gambled down in Atlantic City, I can write off my loss, but my health care for my family, I can't write off unless I'm set up as a corporate and go through that hole, in which we are. But think about that. That makes no sense. Okay, so the fair tax. Embedded taxes are eliminated or reduced. Payroll tax is eliminated. Corporate tax is eliminated. Flat tax, your embedded taxes remain, right, because there's been no change. Corporations are still saying payroll taxes, everyth's paid. Embedded taxes may be reduced, but they will not go away entirely under the flat tax. Payroll taxes remain, corporate taxes will. Dividends, capital gains, and estate taxes may be exempted depending on which particular plan we're talking about with the fair tax. So I want a foolproof thing that's simple, basic, no exceptions. Congress comes, tries to do anything, you chop off their hands. Short and sweet, yes.
Under the flat tax, wouldn't corporations still want to go overseas?
They claim no, and to a certain extent, there would be more benefit because under the fair flat tax, remember, the rate would be, remember I said 35%? Current exempt would be 20% generally, let's say 20. So that's a 15% difference, so there would be more of an incentive to stay here than to leave as they do. Because a lot of people who propose that say, if your tax rate is 20% or less, people will not rush to go through all that to move because they'll think, hey, the rate is low enough, we'll just pay. I just like, the one thing I like most of all between the two, consumption versus income. Consumption is basic. Everybody buys something. So everybody will be contributing one form or another. Even those folks who make low income, they're embedded, but they're still going to, in effect, literally pay their $355 or whatever they got back when they go to a store. So they will be contributing one way or another. By either getting back to a zero balance. Right now, how many times do we have it where folks in this country don't give anything, but they get money back? Anybody familiar with earned income on our current tax code? Talk about an oxymoron misnomer. Earned income means they didn't make anything, but we call it earned income. I guess so Congress figured that sounds nice. Sir?
And lady here had her hand up.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say with the fair tax, I totally agree. I've looked into this, I think it's great. But doesn't there have to be an amendment to one of our?
16th Amendment, there's talk, a lot of folks within the, we tend to just, the 16th Amendment, a lot of proposal of this will be, under the fair tax, will be to eliminate the 16th Amendment, which gives Congress the right to implement an income tax. And a lot of congressmen, we've all been through this, where the congressman will claim, well, I like the idea of the fair tax, however, I'm concerned about double taxation. I'm laughing to myself saying, gee, when did they get rich? Suddenly they're worried about double taxing. Come on, let's get serious. They use that as a red herring. Sure. Bottom line is that I don't necessarily believe we have to focus first on getting rid of the 16th Amendment. I say put this in. When people see how well it works, then it's our job to raise an army, get ready to march on Washington, tell them if you ever try to touch us with another income tax, the pitchforks, everything will come out, which will mean at that point you're telling him get rid of the 16th Amendment.
Dave, just so they know, if the fair tax is enacted, the 16th Amendment, in other words, the income tax goes away. After 7 years, in other words, the fair tax has a sunset provision. If after 7 years, the 16th Amendment is not eliminated, then we have no tax. We have neither the income tax or the fair tax. We go back and basically ground zero.
Yeah, that's a fair, now me personally, I totally disagree with that. Fair tax people said we'll put in a sunset provision. That to me is counterproductive, because here's why. If we know one thing about Congress, what do we know? They're devious. They will then jerk the chain for 7 years for this to happen. They did it already in 1930 with the income tax. How many times have they done that? Or, closer to home, weren't we supposed to lose some tolls on some roads here once they were paid off? Does anybody remember all that? And then, how are we going to take care of the road? Gee, who would have thought? They never thought of that before. It's a con. I don't like that idea of sunset provision. Go after them. I believe you take them on directly. No backing off, no chickening out, let's go. Compare your proposal to our proposal, let the American people decide. That's why our objective is to make it where, whether it's the flat tax or the fair tax, you are aware of how they work. So then when your congressman tries that nonsense on you, you say, sorry, not going for that deal. John.
Hey, would you like to explain the backing that both HR 25 has and the flat tax has? How many people?
Okay, the fair tax right now has what, about 66?
76 in both the House and Senate.
76 co-sponsors. Now, when I ran for Congress, I was in Rush Holt's district, and I had the privilege of debating him at the Asbury Park Press, and I was talking about the fair tax, and then the editors asked Congressman Holt about it, and he said, well, no, nobody's paying it. You know, these folks talk about this stuff, but there's no serious thought about it. It's kind of a pipe dream. I said, really? At the time, there were 6 co-sponsors. I said, really? Well, I said, incidentally, I said, I'd like to rebuttal that. I said, there is a bill, it's H.R. 25 in the House of Representatives, and there are over 60 co-sponsors. At that point, Congressman Holt gave me the dirtiest look, which made my day. Because our rocket scientist was caught with his pants down, not knowing what he was talking about. And nothing gives me more pleasure to show a congressman who doesn't know what he's talking about.
Flat tax has how many?
Dave,
Oh, I'm sorry, flat tax, I think only 5 or 6.
It has 9 plus the sponsor, so 10. That's HR 1040. That's the one.
The one flat tax? Okay.
Yeah, it has no companion bill in the Senate, it's only in the House. Whereas the fair tax has S13 in the Senate, which is a companion bill.
it's worth mentioning to everyone, if you happen to be leaning towards the flat tax, our Woodrow Wilson the Horrible, in 1913, we had basically the fair tax. It was all a consumption tax back then. There was no income tax. And his proposal was to fund World War I with an income tax. And that's how he sold it to the general public. And that was a flat tax. So if anyone thinks that solving this problem with the flat tax is going to make things better, it's not. Because look what happened. We started with it in 1913 and it's morphed into what it is today.
400 pages back then.
Right. So they can't, to Dave's point, is they can't be trusted.
I think we're preaching to the choir like that, are we not? Okay, both the flat tax and fair tax are designed to be revenue neutral, meaning they are designed to bring in the same revenue as the current code. However, if you recall what John said, what would have happened in 2009 and 2010? It would have more money, and weren't we also in a recession at that point? So think if the economy is humming along. See, I think everybody's a better steward of their money than the government.
Oh, yeah.
You worked for it, you earned it, the same way I think about education. When people doubt you would really get rid of the Department of Education. I said, yes. I said, who do you think is more concerned about your child's education? You, your local school teachers, local school board, the principal, or a bureaucrat in Washington or Trenton trying to design a new plan? Who knows more of what's going on? Central planning doesn't work. The Soviet Union has proved it. China proved it. So now China, everything's getting decentral. And you see how their economies grow.
I just want to point out, I seem to remember reading somewhere that you go back, say, the year 1900, most schools had their own board of education.
Okay, that's right. But it's, when I had somebody ask me about this a week ago, I said, don't you care more about your children? They were on the other side. Don't you care more about your children than so-and-so? They said, well, absolutely. I said, then why do you think that they would have your child's interest at heart better than you? And they just kind of looked at me and finally said, yeah, that's true. You know, record keeping. Under the flat tax, you still must file tax returns. You have your risk of audit, you still have to keep your receipts to prove your taxes. Fair tax, no tax return, no risk of audit, no receipts. As John mentioned, once a year you will fill out the card so they know how many people are in your home when they send the prebate. Now, if you make people up, you're committing fraud. And therefore, they've got you on that. That would be pretty simple. Done. Instead of them going through your War and Peace tax return trying to find out, my God, did he take a home interest mortgage deduction? Think about tax court. Are you happy that you folks are spending tax dollars for the U.S. government to bring your neighbor Charlie to tax court because they're claiming his office is only 100 square feet and Charlie claimed it was 120? This kind of stuff has actually gone on a tax court. People laugh about it. Personally, it makes me infuriated. My tax dollars, you're telling me I don't have enough money for this, that, and the other thing. That was only funny. But you have the time to be going after somebody claiming that they did not have, their office was a little smaller than you're claiming. It just makes absolutely no sense. Okay, so imagine, getting to the end, and then if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Imagine you are the founder of a new nation. Well, congratulations, everyone. And you have the power and the ability to develop the tax policy for your new nation. Which would you choose? A tax based on consumption, no tax return, no audit, revenue neutral. Again, a simple single tax rate based on income and simplified corporate taxes. Again, designed to be revenue neutral. Or just to name something out of the air, a 65,000-page tax code chock full of loopholes and gimmicks designed to favor special interests. If your choice is A or B, the question then becomes, why do we allow the politicians, the lobbyists, the elitists, the Ted Kennedys of the world, and special interests hold us hostage using the current tax code? That's a serious question. You have to think about it. They are literally holding us hostage with this. So now it's up to you. To learn more, www.fairtax.org. For the flat tax proposals, again, go online, Google flat tax, and a bunch of good information will come up, and this way you can learn more and be educated about it. Any questions, Deb?
Okay, so what are you doing in Congress? What is their tax do as a lobbyist or whatever?
Okay. One of the things mentioned was about committees before getting on the local committees. We really have to be homegrown. The FairTax is a household name in places like Georgia, in Florida. They'll have 10,000 people attend a rally in Orlando, Florida on the FairTax. New Jersey, it's not well known. Our objective is to make this, to spread the gospel of the FairTax, so people know and understand it. And even similar, the same thing with flat tax folks. We're spreading the gospel so people understand it is a different way to do this. So our objective is, with members of Congress right now, quite frankly, it's a lost cause in New Jersey. We do spend time, these fellows especially, spend a ton of time talking to congressmen, briefing their offices, and a lot of times they'll get told, yes, but we're worried about double taxation or some other nonsensical answer. The problem is this, and here's what you have to understand. A congressman got to where he did by doing what? Currying favor, currying special interest, especially in an area, in industrialized areas of the North. You are now asking them to find religion, disavow all their special interest groups, and do something that's good for everyone in this country. That's hard, because Joe was their big campaign contributor, and he wants a special tax break for his industry. You know, people say, people talk about us as conservatives. Personally, I hate the word conservative. I really do. How many of you believe we should have tax reform? Raise your hand. How many of you think we should have education reform? Okay. Healthcare reform, true healthcare reform, not the Obama number, but true. Okay, then what makes you conservative? The word conservative to most people means status quo. I like things the way they are. I don't care about anybody else. That's how we're perceived. That's why they'll look at people and say, oh, you're just a bunch of rich people who don't care about anybody. That is absolute nonsense, and we've let them believe that about us. Most of us, quite frankly, are Republicans, are we not? And yet, you ask the average American on the street, they think that the Democrats were the ones who freed the slaves. We've allowed that to happen.
They still think.
Exactly. That is the point. We've allowed that to happen. That is not acceptable. We have to start changing. And again, that's why I don't like the word conservative. But the idea is for us to get better at explaining our positions, explaining to people. We want everyone to do better. A true capitalist. Capitalism is the greatest economic form ever in the world. Why? Because if we do a transaction, what is it? It's voluntary. I have a car, he has money. I decide I prefer his money to my car. He decides he'd rather have my car than that money in his hands. We both benefited. Name one other economic system where both parties can say they benefited. They got what they wanted. You can't.
Well,
but again,
barter.
I'm sorry, what? Barter. That's capitalism. That's capitalism.
Well,
That's
money
pure
changes
capitalism.
hands.
See, but again, capitalism has gotten a dirty word where they think capitalists are a bunch of guys sitting around, and when people talk about Adam Smith, they talk about, oh my gosh, all he did was care about the rich. No, if you've ever read The Wealth of Nations, you know one thing about Adam Smith. He was not talking about the rich. He also wrote a book before The Wealth of Nations, Theory of Moral Sentiments, where he was explaining you have to be a moral people, meaning you're not trying to cheat and steal from people. I know when I do my business, I always look at my objective is not to out-negotiate somebody, take advantage of, etc. I look at it as, okay, how do we structure a deal here that works for everybody? That's the way my mind works, and I truly believe that's the way most people's mind works. They have pride in what they do. They're not trying to go out and beat other people. American people are known around the world as the most honest people about trying to give a fair deal to folks. And that is what we have to get along. We want to help people. That's why, to me, the word free enterprise in many cases is much better than the word capitalist. We are truly the liberals. We're the ones who believe in freedom. Unfortunately, the other side has co-opted the word liberal. As Milton Friedman said, we truly are classical liberals. And we've let them get away from that. We've got to start taking it back. Paul was mentioning before, he used a great term, chip away. Every day we've got to learn to chip away. They were chipped away for 30 years to where they became the guys in power. And again, they have the thing liberal, so everybody thinks, oh, Bill Clinton, he just loves freedom. Loves freedom, he's always telling everybody what to do. My attitude is, Bill, buzz off. Go tell yourself what to do and leave me alone. We've got to get back, we've got to get better at getting our message across. And I'm sorry I went on a rant here, but the idea was to go back to things like the FairTax and explain it to people. Because now, tonight everybody's going to go home and go, wow, good idea, or the flat tax, good idea. But if you don't keep learning more and more about it, you'll kind of let it fade in your memory, and then you'll hear somebody else say lie about it, and go, gee, maybe that's true. That's why our idea is to get out, educate folks about it, and please tell people about it. And if you want to contact us or contact Deb, she can get me. We'd love, if any of you have another organization where you'd like to have somebody from the FairTax come and do a presentation anywhere in the state of New Jersey, we would love to. Any questions? Oh, if you have a sign-in sheet, okay, we have a mailing list there. If you want to learn more about it, we don't go out, we don't sell the names or anything. You'll just get information. John, what is it normally, once a week? You'll get a
Friday. A one-page newsletter.
You'll get a one-page newsletter email. That's it. Nobody else will be contacting you or anything. It's the idea is just to continue the education about the FairTax.
Can you get through the FairTax website?
Where is the sign?
You could do that too, sure, absolutely.
Okay.
You sign over here, John will take care of getting that thing to
Okay,
you.
Paul.
Who created these formulas, and is there any country that has anything even similar? Because this is unproven. I'm not saying it won't work.
Right.
But has
No
anybody
country
tried
has
anything
it.
similar?
Brazil was toying around with it, and the people who actually came up with it, talking about patriots, refused to give it to them. They can do their own. I mean, it doesn't take Fellini to figure that, or Einstein, I should not Fellini, Einstein, to figure out how to work it, but the concept is there. But Brazil talked about it, and the people who kind of are the economists and all who worked on it and figured it out here. How the FairTax started were a bunch of businessmen down in Dallas, Texas, were sitting around, and what they talked about at their meetings every time was tax policy. How many of you folks own businesses? Raise your hand. How much time do you devote to figuring out the tax ramifications of things you do? Quite a bit, right? These folks own pretty big companies, so they're spending all kinds of time. They have whole departments doing this. So they started saying, you know, we talk about it so much, why don't we put our money where our mouth is and try to come up with a better system? They went out and hired economists. I told them, figure it out. We're not going to tell you what to do. We want you to truly come up with what you think would be the best system. They came back with the FairTax. Now what was interesting was afterward, the guys who commissioned them to do it said, you know, it's funny, we all thought they were going to come back with a flat tax like an flat income tax. So this surprised them. But the more and more you think and learn about it, you go, gee, this makes a lot of sense. Because people say, well, what if everybody stopped buying? How could that possibly happen? Do you all have this, tell the truth, you all have this great desire to have this little green paper with a bunch of dead presidents on it. That's your goal. No, you want what that money can do for you. You want that money that can give you financial freedom, correct? But you can determine that better than anyone else. Not some fella in Washington. So obviously, you are going to spend, hopefully you'll be saving. It's a balance. Everything is a balance. So they actually, that's how they came up with it. Unfortunately, their ideas of marketing were not so good. The first thing they did was they went out and hired lobbyists. You're literally putting lobbyists out of business, so the first thing you do is hire a lobbyist? Didn't make sense, but you live and learn. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned educating the youth.
Yes.
We could all stand a little education on economics. Do you have any books?
Great question. Best book ever, I think, on economics. Economics in one lesson, Henry Hazlitt. Henry Hazlitt. He's from the Austrian School of Economics. He used to be the new, just to show you how far we've fallen, he used to be the economic editor for the New York Times 50 years ago.
What's the book on again?
Economics in one lesson, Henry Hazlitt. For the layperson, that is the best book to start with. It's absolutely brilliant. Other great books, Thomas Sowell is my favorite author. Applied Economics is one book, and his other great economics book is Basic Economics. These are better than your Lord's books. Oh, I'm sorry, you mentioned that. Good. Henry Hazlitt, Hazlit.
Dave, dovetailing off of Debbie's question though, are there any books for kids, for real kids?
Oh, yes, thank you. Peter Schiff, does everybody know who Peter Schiff is?
Yes.
Yeah.
He wrote a book last year, he's written some great books, Crash Proof and all, which told what was going to happen in the real estate market. He got it so right when all the so-called other experts got it so wrong. It was amazing how he nailed it. But he wrote a book about a year or two ago, How an Economy Crashes by Peter Schiff. Superb book for kids and for us too. I read it all the time. It's a great Peter Schiff, S-E-H-I-F-F.
I think it's very
Right.
And it's called How an Economy Crashes, Grows and Crashes, something like that. They probably have it in this library, or Google it. They have it at Amazon. Absolutely superb book.
Age range? What would you say that? that would
Anywhere
target?
from 5 years on, because you could even read
Really?
it to little ones and don't get it. It's parables. It's almost like how Jesus taught.
Really?
It's parables and it's dead on.
Okay then.
It's dead on. Now, FairTax books. The first one would be the FairTax book. It was written by Congressman John Linder, who was the primary motivating force in Congress and the sponsor for the FairTax. And how many of you are familiar with Neil Port's?
Oh, yeah.
Radio. Neil Port's wrote the book with John Linder. Okay? And then they wrote a book, Answers to the FairTax, because people had questions and people were sending out misinformation about it. So they, what was the follow-up's technical name, John? FairTax questions answered?
No, I think it was called Answers to the FairTax.
Answers to the FairTax, okay. And that was the second book that they wrote to answer some questions I came up with. Then Ken Hoagland's wrote a book called the FairTax book, which is very good as well. And if you start with that, right.
What was the last one?
Ken Hoagland, Hoagland.
So both books are with the same name, the FairTax book?
Yeah, actually, it's two of them,
Same
yes.
author.
Yeah.
Paulson, and
Now obviously, if you really want to get into it, Adam Smith, but that's a 1,000-page book. You're welcome. It's kind of, he was a Scottish professor. It's kind of tough to read, but I mean, he was obviously ahead of his time.
Where is going to be your next presentation?
I'm not sure. It's probably going to. What's the cable up here? The cable state is it Cablevision? Okay, I'm actually being interviewed on a television program Thursday. It's going to be airing in March and April. I get the information out to Deb when we know when it will be on, and this way we'll be talking about FairTax and things like that. Okay, John.
For all of you Tea Party members, Tea Party convention last summer down in, I think, was it St. Louis or? Phoenix. They voted, they had a floor vote on the fair tax versus the flat tax. And the vast majority voted for the fair tax. So the Tea Party at the general convention, it's not Tea Party, I don't think it's Tea Party official policy or a plank in their platform.
Yeah, I think they say that they can't officially endorse, but it was voted overwhelmingly.
So it is, it's part of this world.
But those books, but again, either the Thomas Sowell books or for our age level, or the Henry Hazlitt book, you can't go wrong. And they'll turn you on in those books to other great books. I mean, Milton Friedman wrote some great books too, but they're a little bit more denser. So you start with those books, so when you go to a Friedman or something, you're like, oh, okay, I see how this works.
So where is your schedule? If I find a place where you can do the presentation?
You mean like at the Parsippany Tea Party? Okay, well, let me give you, did I put my name and number on my telephone? Let me give you my number.
It's on the card.
It's on the card, okay. It's on the card, but I'll yell it out for everybody again. 732, that's it. 923-1410, and if you have something where you'd like one of us to come speak, we would absolutely appreciate it and love it.
One thing, are you related to Jerome Corsi?
No. I interviewed him. I used to do a couple radio shows. I did radio programs. And one time I interviewed him, and we did track it down to where, because We weren't sure, he might have been distantly related, but he came from a different part of Jersey.
Dave, these cards are over there if they
We've
want,
got a
okay?
JR 50/50, would you do the honors?
Okay. Better get your tickets out.
Correct one.
I'll be running.